Jack had always prided himself on his peaceful suburban retreat. His home was more than just a house. It was his sanctuary, a quiet, tree-lined street in a small, friendly neighborhood, where the hum of daily life blended with the occasional chirp of birds and the rustling of leaves. But that sense of serenity shattered one crisp autumn morning. It started innocently enough. A single car rolling past his driveway, its tires crunching over the gravel as it briefly slowed. Jack hadn't thought much of it. After all, it was a narrow cul-de-sac. Maybe the driver was lost or had made a wrong turn. He'd seen it happen before. But then it happened again. And again. Cars began to slow down, pulling off the street and idling at the edge of his driveway before turning their wheels onto the gravel. The vehicles were never there for long, just a quick stop to dodge the busy intersection at the end of the street, but it was becoming increasingly regular. It wasn't just one or two cars. Soon, it seemed like everyone was doing it. Jack would wake up in the morning, and there they'd be, parked halfway up his driveway or cruising through like it was part of the road. They'd speed past him as he stood on his front porch, trying to catch a glimpse of the drivers, but they always looked like strangers. People he didn't know. People who saw his driveway as just a convenient shortcut to avoid the traffic light. At first, Jack did nothing. He wasn't the type to make a scene, but the repeated use of his private space, the increasing frequency of cars parking or stopping on his property, started to gnaw at him. His home had always been his haven, a quiet, private domain, and now it was being overrun. One evening, as Jack pulled into his driveway after a long day at work, he noticed a delivery truck parked in the middle of it, its engine still running. A large sign on the side read, "Fresh goods, delivered to your door." Jack clenched his jaw. The driver wasn't anywhere to be seen, but the truck was clearly blocking him in. He took a deep breath. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe the driver would move. But as the minutes ticked by, his patience began to fray. The truck wasn't going anywhere, and the longer it sat there, the more his frustration grew. He had places to be, errands to run. The nerve of the delivery service to think it was okay to block someone's driveway, especially his. Jack grabbed his phone, dialed the company number printed on the side of the truck, and waited as it rang. "Hello," a voice finally answered, sounding nonchalant, as though this was a common issue. "Your driver's blocking my driveway." "I can't get out," Jack snapped, trying to keep his voice steady. "Oh, that's just where we parked." "He'll be back in a minute," the voice replied with a tone that implied it wasn't a big deal. But to Jack, it was a big deal. He was trapped, late, and helpless. A car honked behind him. Jack's grip tightened around the steering wheel. "Get the driver to move now," he ordered, his pulse quickening. The next 10 minutes felt like an eternity. The truck finally pulled out, but the damage was done. Jack had missed the meeting he'd been heading to. It wasn't just the delivery truck. It was everything building up, like the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. The endless cars using his driveway as a shortcut, the lack of respect for his property. He'd had enough. Standing there in his driveway, Jack realized this wasn't a minor inconvenience anymore. This was an invasion. A silent, creeping invasion of his space, and it was getting worse by the day. The next day, Jack sat at his kitchen table, staring at his phone. The morning sun cast a warm glow across the countertops, but the light did little to lift his mood. His fingers hovered over the screen, and after a few moments of indecision, he tapped the number of the Homeowners Association, HOA. He'd had enough. The HOA was supposed to protect homeowners like him from exactly this kind of intrusion, wasn't it? Surely they would listen, take action, and restore some order. Jack wasn't asking for the world, just that people stopped treating his driveway like a public street. It seemed simple, reasonable. But as the phone rang, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he was already swimming against the current. "HOA, how may I assist you?" The voice on the other end was flat, disinterested. "Hi, this is Jack from 118 Sycamore Lane," he began, trying to keep his voice calm. "I've been having an issue with cars using my driveway as a shortcut. It's becoming a real problem, and I need something done about it." The woman on the other end sighed. Jack could almost hear her rolling her eyes. "Oh, we've received a few complaints about this, but it's not really an urgent issue. I'll make a note of it, but we don't typically intervene in these things unless it becomes a safety concern." Jack's frustration flared, but he forced himself to stay composed. "It's already a problem. People are blocking my driveway, and I can't get out when I need to. I'm late for work. I've missed meetings. This is affecting my daily life." The voice was dismissive. "Sir, I understand, but it's just a minor inconvenience. The HOA board will discuss it at our next meeting, but in the meantime, we suggest you try talking to your neighbors directly. I'm sure they'll understand." "Talking to my neighbors?" Jack echoed, incredulous. "They're the ones doing it, and the HOA is supposed to be the one to step in. You can't just brush this off." There was a long pause on the line, followed by the clack of a keyboard. The woman sighed again. "Sir, I'll put this on the agenda, but I can't promise any immediate action. You'll have to wait for the next board meeting." Jack stared at the phone, silent for a moment, feeling a hot flush of anger creeping up his neck. He had known this would happen. The HOA was a bureaucratic mess, moving at a glacial pace, if it moved at all. Their apathy was as clear as the cloudless sky outside, and it infuriated him even more. He was one man against a faceless organization, and their only response was to pass the problem off as no big deal. The line went dead, and Jack felt the weight of defeat settle in his chest. The HOA had failed him. There was no one to help, no one but himself. The cars, he knew, wouldn't stop coming. Already, the hum of an engine filtered through his open window. A blue sedan slowed, swerved onto his driveway, and then zipped away, leaving a trail of dust in its wake. Jack's blood began to boil. He watched as the car disappeared down the road, and a thought began to form, dangerous, wild, but strangely satisfying. Why not take control? What if he could make his driveway unusable? What if he could stop people from trespassing entirely? The idea grew in his mind like a wildfire, spreading quickly. Gravel, spike strips, maybe even a few surprises hidden in plain sight. If the HOA wouldn't protect his property, he'd do it himself. He could no longer rely on a system that didn't care, a system that would take months, if not years, to act. Jack's pulse quickened as he sat there in the quiet of his kitchen, staring out at the empty street. The decision had been made. He was going to fight back, and he wouldn't stop until the problem was solved. The question now was, how far was he willing to go to protect his space? The car had come and gone, but Jack's resolve was only just beginning to solidify. And in the stillness of his home, he realized something terrifying. He wasn't just reclaiming his driveway. He was about to take on the HOA itself. Jack's mind raced as the decision settled within him. It was no longer a fleeting thought. It was a plan, one that would reshape everything. His driveway, once a quiet space for his car to rest, had become the front line of a war he didn't ask for, but was now fully committed to fighting. That evening, the final straw would fall. The sun had just dipped below the horizon when Jack drove home, his tires crunching over the familiar gravel of his driveway. He had been away for most of the day, and the usual sight of cars speeding past his property filled him with a familiar simmering rage. But what awaited him as he pulled in was different. This time, the intrusion had taken a more brazen form. There, parked in the middle of his driveway, blocking his garage entirely, was a massive cement truck. The wheels were angled awkwardly, as if the driver had deliberately chosen to block him in. The truck's engine idled low, the deep rumble reverberating through the quiet neighborhood, and the bright orange cones surrounding it were meant to protect nothing but the driver's own convenience. Jack's pulse quickened. This was no mistake. The truck had parked there because it could. No one had said anything. No one had told the driver to move. Jack was trapped. Again. He slammed his car into park, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. He could feel his heartbeat in his ears. His mind raced. This wasn't just another annoyance. This was a blatant violation. A delivery truck, a cement truck, whatever, it didn't matter. The fact that anyone thought it was okay to park on his property without a second thought was infuriating. Jack threw open the door with a force that made it bang against the frame. His eyes shot to the driver's side of the cement truck, but there was no driver. No one in sight. He grabbed his phone, his fingers trembling with frustration. He quickly dialed the company's number, watching the truck like a hawk, waiting for some sign of life. It took a few rings before a voice picked up. "Hello. This is Jack from 118 Sycamore Lane." Jack started, trying to sound calm despite the storm brewing in his chest. "Your truck is blocking my driveway. I can't get into my garage. I need this moved now." There was a pause on the other end, just enough time for Jack's fury to grow. "Oh, well, we're delivering here, and the truck can't move. Should be about an hour before it's done. If you want to park somewhere else in the meantime, feel free." Jack's jaw tightened. An hour. He was late for an important meeting. His time, his day. It all felt like it meant nothing to the driver, to the company. And as the seconds ticked by, Jack could feel the last of his patience slipping away. An hour. He could feel the weight of the world pressing on his shoulders. He wasn't just late. He was angry, helpless, humiliated in his own home. A small voice in his mind whispered that this was his breaking point. This had to be the end of it. The truck's engine roared as the driver finally climbed into the cab, preparing to unload the cement. Jack's eyes locked onto the back of the vehicle, the giant spout ready to pour its contents across his driveway. In that moment, the decision became clear. The HOA had failed him. The companies had failed him. The system had failed him. It was time for Jack to take matters into his own hands. A plan was forming now, sharp, precise, and driven by a simmering rage that had been building for months. The thought felt dangerous, bold, but what other choice did he have? His eyes narrowed as he stood in the driveway, the hum of the truck in the background. He couldn't let this continue. He wouldn't. Not anymore. A low chuckle escaped Jack's lips, as if to relieve some of the mounting tension. The world around him felt suddenly very small. The path forward seemed narrow, but it was his to take. And then, with a quiet resolve, Jack walked into his garage. He wasn't just going to get revenge. He was going to make sure no one ever crossed his driveway again. Jack lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts whirling in a frenzied spiral. The image of the cement truck blocking his driveway, the sounds of the engine idling, the driver's indifferent tone on the phone. It all replayed in his mind like a film on loop. He could still feel the gnawing rage in his chest. The last shred of patience had snapped that evening. There was no going back now. As the minutes ticked by in the quiet of the night, Jack's mind started to work. He couldn't just keep waiting for things to improve. The HOA was a dead end. He'd learned it the hard way. The neighbors, most of them unaware of the growing problem, wouldn't understand the gravity of it. It was up to him. He was going to make his driveway unusable for anyone who thought they could treat it like a public road. It wasn't a decision he made lightly. He knew it would stir things up, bring unwanted attention, maybe even get him in trouble. But the thought of continuing to live with this daily invasion was unbearable. No one respected his space. No one respected his property. Jack could feel his hands begin to shake as he thought about what he had to do. The plan began to take shape in his mind, clear and decisive. Gravel, spike strips, maybe a few other surprises hidden in plain sight. He had done some research the night before, and what he discovered was both liberating and terrifying. Jack wasn't some reckless teenager looking to cause chaos. He was taking control of his own property. Every item he needed was available at the local hardware store, and though the cost was steep, It felt like a small price to pay for reclaiming his space. His plan was simple but devious. First, he would rip up the existing gravel and replace it with fresh, loose stones that would make any vehicle hesitate. Then, beneath the gravel, he would install a series of concealed spike strips, hidden in such a way that only a truly careless driver would see them too late. And just to ensure maximum impact, Jack had a few tricks up his sleeve. Nothing deadly, of course, but just enough to make sure the next person who thought they could park on his driveway would think twice. He couldn't help but smile at the thought. He wasn't just fixing the problem. He was making a statement. No more shortcuts. No more vehicles treating his driveway like a road. He spent the next few days gathering supplies. It wasn't easy. He had to be discreet. If anyone saw him preparing, it could raise unwanted questions. But Jack was determined. Every night after work, he would drive to the local hardware store, buying bags of gravel, rolls of spike strips, and everything else he needed to set his plan in motion. But with each purchase, the adrenaline grew. He was about to cross a line he couldn't uncross. It was one thing to be annoyed by the inconvenience. It was another thing entirely to actively fight back. Jack wasn't sure if he was excited or terrified. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about protecting his property anymore. It was about sending a message. The closer he got to executing his plan, the more it consumed him. At work, at home, even in his sleep, all Jack could think about was how to get the job done. Every time a car passed by, he could feel his resolve hardening. He could hear the gravel crunching beneath their tires. Not anymore, he thought. The moment finally arrived. The materials were stacked in his garage, ready to go. Jack had spent weeks preparing, and tonight was the night. The stars outside were hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds, the air cool and still, perfect for what was about to unfold. As Jack stood in his driveway, gazing at the quiet, dark street, he knew there was no turning back. His plan was set into motion. The moonlight was thin and scattered, barely cutting through the overcast night sky, casting shadows across Jack's driveway. The quiet was suffocating, the only sound the soft rustling of leaves in the cool breeze. Jack stood there, his hands trembling with anticipation as he stared at the tools and materials he'd gathered over the past few weeks. Tonight, everything would change. He'd spent days thinking about every detail, every possibility. The spike strips were hidden beneath fresh gravel, carefully placed in a pattern that would catch any vehicle that wasn't paying attention. The gravel, loose and thick, would make sure no one could cruise by without notice. It was the perfect trap, and Jack was about to spring it. He took a deep breath, pulling the shovel from the back of his truck. The weight of it in his hands felt oddly reassuring. He wasn't some petty thief. He wasn't vandalizing anything. No, this was justice. This was him protecting what was his. And no one was going to treat his property like a public street anymore. Jack began by moving the old gravel, the jagged rocks shifting beneath his feet as he worked. His breath came quicker, and his heart thudded in his chest. Every movement felt deliberate, but the rush of excitement in his veins made it hard to stay steady. He worked fast, his hands covered in dirt, the air heavy with the scent of earth and anticipation. As the minutes stretched on, Jack finally uncovered the ground beneath. He could already see the outline of the spike strips. They were ready, just waiting for a car to roll over them. The thought sent a jolt of adrenaline through his body. He felt like he was about to pull off a heist. This wasn't just a protest. It was a statement, something that would make the world take notice. Once the strips were positioned, he covered them with a fresh layer of gravel. The sharp spikes were hidden beneath the smooth surface, undetectable to anyone who didn't know they were there. All that would take was one careless driver, one vehicle that didn't know they were driving over a trap. Jack could already picture it in his mind. The tires screeching as they hit the spikes, the frustrated honking as they tried to move forward. But it was too late. They would be caught, just like everyone who had ever used his driveway as a shortcut. He couldn't stop grinning. It was a perfect plan. Jack stood back for a moment, surveying his work. The driveway, once a mundane, quiet space, now felt like a battleground. Every inch of gravel, every spike carefully positioned, felt like a declaration of war against the disrespect that had been shown to him. His pulse was racing as he wiped the sweat from his brow. He hadn't thought about it too much until now, but the gravity of what he was doing was beginning to sink in. There were risks, serious ones. If anyone found out, he could be in serious trouble. Property damage, lawsuits. But right now, that didn't matter. The feeling of control, of taking back what was rightfully his, was intoxicating. Then, just as Jack was about to head back inside, a distant sound reached his ears. The low hum of an engine. A car. His heart skipped a beat as he froze, his breath catching in his throat. The headlights flashed down the street, and Jack's stomach dropped. Was it happening already? The car was coming fast. Too fast. The moment of truth had arrived. Jack held his breath as the car approached. This was it. The moment he had waited for. His entire plan had led to this point, this one defining moment. Would the car hit the trap? Would the spikes work as they were supposed to? He took a step back, barely able to contain his excitement, his anxiety, and his fear all at once. The car slowed as it neared his driveway, its tires humming against the pavement. Jack's heart pounded harder. Come on. The headlights grew brighter as the car neared Jack's driveway. He could see the figure behind the wheel now, just a shadow moving against the glow of the headlights, oblivious to the trap that lay ahead. Jack's breath caught in his throat. This was it, the culmination of weeks of frustration, planning, and silent rage. The car slowed as it approached, just like all the others before it. Jack's pulse raced as he pressed himself into the shadows of his garage, holding his breath, his eyes fixed on the vehicle. He could feel his heart beating in his ears, the sound of the engine coming closer with each passing second. And then it happened. The car's tires hit the loose gravel at the edge of his driveway. The sound was deafening. A loud crunch of tires against stone, followed by a sharp, sickening pop. Jack's stomach lurched as he saw the car jolt, its suspension slamming downward as it hit the hidden spike strips. For a moment, the car continued to roll forward, seemingly unaffected, but then it came to an abrupt stop. The tires screamed in protest as they tried to move, but the spikes had done their work. 3 of the tires were already deflated, the sharp metal points piercing through the rubber like a hot knife through butter. The car lurched forward again, struggling to move, but it was too late. The vehicle was stuck. Jack's heart raced, a strange sense of triumph surging through him, mingled with a wave of anxiety. He had done it. The trap had worked. But now, the real question lingered in the air. What next? The driver, a middle-aged man with a thick beard, jumped out of the car, his hands flying up in disbelief. What the hell? He yelled, staring at his flat tires. He kicked the side of the car in frustration, then looked around, clearly bewildered. His gaze landed on Jack's driveway, and for the first time, he noticed the freshly laid gravel. Jack, still hidden in the shadows, felt his chest tighten. This was the moment when everything could go wrong. The driver was already looking around, his eyes scanning the area. The trap hadn't just worked, it had created a new problem. "Hello," the man shouted, his voice echoing down the quiet street. "Anyone there? Who did this?" Jack stayed still, breathing shallowly, his heart hammering. He couldn't risk being seen. Not yet. He had no idea how this would play out, but one thing was clear. The man was now a victim of his own disregard. The driver had been part of the problem for so long, cutting through Jack's property without a second thought. But now he was paying the price. The man cursed again, pulling out his phone. Jack could see the glow of the screen from where he stood, and he knew the next step would be inevitable. The police. This would draw attention to what Jack had done, whether it was justified or not. A pit of dread settled in his stomach. What had he really accomplished? Sure, The driver had been stopped, but Jack hadn't thought through the consequences of this action. The idea of the authorities showing up, of neighbors waking up to the chaos he had created, sent a chill through his spine. His pulse began to race even faster. The man on the phone was speaking rapidly now, his voice frantic. Jack could hear the panic in his words, and it made him realize something even more unsettling. This wasn't just about his driveway anymore. This had escalated into something bigger, something uncontrollable. Jack's hands shook as he gripped the edge of the garage, unable to pull his gaze away from the scene unfolding before him. There was no going back now. The man paced around the car, his face contorted in frustration, still shouting into his phone. Jack remained crouched behind the garage, the adrenaline coursing through his veins like wildfire. He couldn't stop watching the scene unfold. The man was now a part of the mess Jack had created. The realization hit him hard. He had crossed a line, and it wasn't just about protecting his property anymore. It was about the mess he had made for everyone involved. The sound of sirens in the distance pierced the night, growing louder with every passing second. Jack's heart skipped a beat. Already, he had expected this. He knew it was inevitable, but hearing them so close made the reality sink in. This wasn't just some prank anymore. It was real. The law was about to be involved. Jack's mind raced with thoughts of what he could say, what he could do to explain himself. There was no easy way out now. As the sirens got closer, the man on the phone hung up abruptly, his face pale, his movements frantic. He turned to the car, looking at the deflated tires, shaking his head as if in disbelief. Jack felt a pang of guilt hit him. The man wasn't just a faceless commuter anymore. He was a person, a victim of his own carelessness, yes, but still a person. Was this really the way he wanted to handle this? But before Jack could process his own thoughts further, the flashing lights illuminated the street, casting a harsh blue and red glow across his driveway. The police car screeched to a halt, and two officers quickly emerged, their eyes scanning the scene as the man rushed toward them, his arms flailing in frustration. This guy. The man pointed directly at Jack's house. He's the one who did this. The officers nodded, their eyes now scanning the gravel driveway. Jack could see them noticing the uneven patches of ground where the gravel had been disturbed, the signs of recent digging. It wasn't hard for them to piece together what had happened. One of the officers approached the man, asking questions, while the other began inspecting the car. Jack's stomach twisted into knots. The worst was yet to come. This wasn't just a simple parking dispute anymore. This was an investigation. What had he done? Then, as if the universe had a sense of cruel timing, the neighbors started to emerge from their houses, drawn by the flashing lights and commotion. Jack spotted Mr. Henderson, 2 houses down, standing at his front door in his bathrobe, arms folded tightly across his chest. Mrs. Klein from next door stood on her porch, squinting in the direction of the driveway, looking utterly perplexed. Jack's anxiety grew. He couldn't just sit back and let this play out. He had to make a decision. Fast. The police were already onto him, and the neighbors were watching, whispering. He could feel their eyes on him, even though they couldn't possibly know what had happened yet. It was only a matter of time before someone made the connection. His thoughts snapped back to the officers, who were now discussing the situation, pointing at the tire marks, the spike strips, everything. He could hear snippets of their conversation, but it wasn't enough. They were still piecing things together. Jack's instincts kicked in. He couldn't let them tie this back to him. Not yet. Not until he had a chance to figure things out. He needed to get inside. Out of sight, out of reach. But as he took a step backward, his foot kicked a metal can, sending it clattering to the ground with a loud clang. His heart stopped. The officers turned, their eyes sweeping the yard. Jack froze, his breath caught in his throat. This was it. They were looking at him now. They were beginning to suspect something. The moment of truth had arrived. Jack's foot hovered over the fallen can, the sound of it echoing in his mind like a death knell. The officer's eyes snapped toward him. sharp and calculating. His breath hitched as he froze, the weight of the moment crashing down on him. This was it. Everything he had carefully planned. The gravel, the spikes, the hidden retribution, was teetering on the edge of discovery. He couldn't back out now, not after everything he had done to get to this point. The officers slowly started toward him, their eyes narrowing with suspicion. Jack's chest tightened, but he couldn't move. His feet felt like lead, his mind racing with potential escape plans, but none of them seemed practical. If he ran, if he tried to hide, he knew they'd come after him. The whole neighborhood was waking up now. They could hear the commotion, see the flashing lights. It was too late to back out. "What's going on here?" one of the officers asked, his voice sharp. He looked straight at Jack, his expression unreadable. Jack swallowed hard, his throat dry. He forced his voice to stay calm, even though his heart was pounding in his chest. "I'm Jack. I had live here," he stammered, trying to keep his cool. His mind was running in circles, desperately searching for the right words. How could he explain this? The officer's gaze lingered on Jack for a long moment, his eyes scanning the driveway, then the surrounding area. The other officer was still talking to the man who had been trapped, asking questions, taking notes, but Jack knew the real focus was now on him. Every second felt like an eternity. I don't know what happened," Jack continued, his voice shaking slightly. "I was inside. I didn't. We're going to need to take a look around." The officer interrupted, his tone not giving away any emotion. "You've got a lot of fresh gravel here. And there's damage to this vehicle. What can you tell us about it?" The words hit Jack like a punch to the gut. They were closing in, and there was no way out now. His mind screamed for him to lie, to make up some excuse. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't work. The evidence was all around them. The fresh gravel, the spike strips buried just beneath, the unmistakable damage to the car. As if on cue, the second officer approached, his face tense as he took in the situation. "We found a few things," he said, his voice low. "Looks like someone put these spikes here on purpose. This isn't a random incident." The air was thick with tension. Jack could feel his throat tightening, his palms sweaty. He wanted to explain, to shout that he had been pushed too far, but the words wouldn't come. The officers were looking at him now, their suspicion turning into something else, something colder, more certain. They knew it was over. The man with the broken tires, still talking to the officers, shot Jack a hateful look. "You did this, didn't you?" he snapped. "This is all you're doing." Jack opened his mouth, ready to speak, but no words came out. His mind raced as the reality of the situation settled in. His own neighbors had seen him out here, his involvement had already been noticed, and there was no way to escape the consequences now. But then something unexpected happened. As the officers continued to discuss the situation, one of them glanced back at the gravel. His gaze flickered to the ground, then back at Jack, a faint glimmer of recognition in his eyes. "Wait," the officer said slowly, pointing at the ground. This looks like a warning, not a random attack. Someone's trying to send a message." The air shifted as the officers exchanged glances, their expressions softening ever so slightly. Jack didn't know what to make of it. Was he getting a break? Was this about to go in his favor? The officer turned back to Jack, his tone less harsh now. "This situation's complicated," he said, his voice more measured. "You've clearly taken matters into your own hands, but we'll need to look into this further. Just stay calm. We're not finished here." As Jack stood there, the enormity of the night finally hit him. The trap had worked. The message had been sent. The whole neighborhood knew something had happened, but it wasn't just about the spike strips anymore. It was about the boundary he had drawn. The lines had been crossed. The rules had been shattered. And Jack, he had done something no one would forget.